citation here. These are the citations of the data that I'm using here. We have a nice thing in this country. We have large statistical survey data sets available for anybody who's got the software and the perseverance to know how to process them. You get census data on populations and you hook the two up. So as I told you, overall in Virginia, marijuana arrests were up to 17,865. We were plateauing around 13,000. Last couple years, steady increase. Arrest rates for everybody, we had a little bit of a dip actually, first part of the last 10 years. They also have been increasing, we're up to 229. But here, this is just arrests. Just totals. And obviously, more whites than blacks. But not too many more whites than blacks. And that's the first indication that we have an interesting little phenomenon here. And then we get to arrest rates. And I said 2 to 3 times, maybe 5 times higher. Well, 5 times or more in some cities, but 506 is the arrest rate for blacks in our Commonwealth compared to 173 for whites. Yeah, it's roughly 3 times greater. And I present this data over the last 10 years to show that it's not an accident or an anomaly or just an odd instance from one particular year. Now, if you compare the population to the percent of arrests, that yellowish bar, that's completely consistent. Blacks are about 20% of the population. But in 1999, they were about 35% of the marijuana arrests. And then that has increased. Marijuana arrests are going up in Virginia because we're arresting even more African Americans year to year to year. To whereas now we're looking at 43% of all marijuana arrests, African Americans. By the way, this is a characteristic of all arrest data. Okay, we arrest a lot more blacks than whites for various reasons. But the thing that distinguishes these arrests, unlike any of the other crimes, as described by the government, we know how many people use marijuana. At least we have a fair idea from national surveys how many people use marijuana. And looking at monthly and annual marijuana use amongst the targeted age groups, 12 to 17, teenagers, and age 18 to 25, young adults. Actually, whites use marijuana. Marijuana is more popular with whites than it is with blacks. It's a minor distinction. But the difference here between the usage rates does not explain why we arrest 3 or 4 times more blacks. If blacks use marijuana 3 or 4 times more than whites did, if the percentage was 30% among blacks and 10% amongst whites, that might explain why more of them are arrested. But it's not because marijuana use is more popular amongst blacks. Again, if anything, from the data from the National Household Survey, it's now the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, marijuana use is more prevalent, more widespread amongst whites. So, it's a very simple point, and it exists at the national level. It exists in every state in the country. It exists in almost every major city in the country. It exists in cities that have black-run police departments, black-led political economies, mayor, city council, attorney general, district attorneys, police officers. I'll comment briefly on why all this happens at the conclusion of this. And it happens throughout Virginia. Now here I have a table of the 15 largest jurisdictions. We don't have data from Fairfax. It's a mystery. I haven't looked into it. They're one of the best funded, best run, most professionally run, most affluent counties in the state, if not the nation. I have little bits of data from them, but it's not the whole county, so if I left it out, it'd be conspicuous. You look at the other 14, though, you have a substantial number of arrests. You have arrest rates that run from 335 here in the city of Richmond to 1,200 in Newport News. You look at the percentages, compare the arrest percentage to the population percentage. Spotsylvania, 28% of arrests, only 15% of population. In my home county of Loudoun, we only have 8% black population, but they're 20% of the marijuana arrests. Same thing, 15 largest jurisdictions, comparing the white rate to the black rate, and then I'm a stat geek, so I have a ratio for you. It's 3 to 6 times higher in Fairfax on the little bit of data I have for that place. But here in Richmond, it's 3.5 times higher, the black rate compared to the white rate. In Newport News, it's 4 times higher. In Arlington, not the most conservative place in the state, I must add, 6.7 times higher. Prince William County, a pretty conservative place in this state, 2.3 times higher. No matter where you sample throughout the state, you will see this phenomenon. And again, it's throughout the entire country. This is nothing peculiar to Virginia. Now, where is it the worst? Here is a list of the 15 places at the top of my list when I sort all this stuff out by arrest rate. This is all 2008 data, by the way. And, okay, Carroll County, Virginia. It's totally unfair of me to pick on Carroll County. They arrested 3 blacks. Okay? So, I mean, some of these things are a little bit phenomenal. If you look at Newport News, you look at Lynchburg, you look at Williamsburg. Okay, Williamsburg, 17. Okay, again, some of these are small numbers, but small numbers of arrests or large numbers of arrests. This phenomenon can be found throughout our state. We arrest blacks a lot more than we arrest whites. Blacks are misrepresented, they are overrepresented. So when you think about political change, when you think about organizing community support for reform, you need to go to the people who are impacted by these laws. Now, college students and young adults, absolutely. They are one of the most impacted populations, and I ran those numbers off. I'll stand over there. But African Americans are disproportionately affected by marijuana laws. Now, I mentioned I would touch briefly on why. It's because police have enforcement priorities that are based on certain parts of the city, the county, the state, what have you. They run enforcement actions in urban areas, for example, and they run enforcement actions, they have a greater police presence in certain areas of certain jurisdictions for various reasons, often because the local community has requested and demanded a stronger police presence. A lot of marijuana arrests are incidental to other activity, a traffic infraction, people hanging out on the street corner getting a little bit too boisterous, a domestic dispute. I don't believe that this phenomenon exists because of outright racial bias or prejudice. But it doesn't really matter why it exists. It might be explained by police activity and where they go, and there are more African Americans there, and there are more African Americans caught up in their in whatever enforcement activity they're working on. But the fact of the matter is, it's not fair. There's no way to have marijuana law enforcement in this country without it impacting disproportionately on African Americans. And that's a problem, and that should be troubling to everyone, white and black, because we live in a society founded on the principle of equal justice for all. So whatever the reason is immaterial. The outcome is beyond challenge. The numbers show it every year, everywhere, and certainly in our state of Virginia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience with our technical difficulties. Next, I would like to invite Lenice Werth. She's the founder of the Virginians Against Drug Violence. She's one of the longest fighting reformers in the state of Virginia for marijuana law reform and a member of the Normal Women's Alliance. Please welcome her.
Thank you so much, and thank you for coming here today. Now, before I go any further, I just want to challenge one thing. Sabrina, first of all, get a couple of shots. Okay, where's Roy? I don't see you, Roy.
Roy, you may call.
Yeah, okay, I am not one of the longest serving, I'm not the longest serving activist in this state. There's one of them, yes, she's close enough, but I want to introduce you to the actual grandfather of Virginia activism, and that's Roy Sharpe. And it's because of Roy Sharpe.
Grandfather of anyone in this room, as far as I know.
Oh, get out of here,
Back
Roy.
there ahead of you.
Get out of here.
Follow.
Anyway, it's because of Roy that we aren't, when we do light up in Virginia, facing some very draconian laws. He got marijuana laws liberalized during the 70s in this state. I know he had other people working with him, but he was the highly visible leader of those people, and he did a stellar job of getting, there was a guy actually serving a life sentence out in Galax or something like that for one joint. And that was possible under Virginia law. It's not anymore, and that's because of Roy. So we all... Done here talked about their marijuana use, so I'm going to talk about mine. I don't usually do this, but my late husband, he used to think just like Queen Elizabeth, that it really helped my gosh darn PMS, and so I was always compelled to use cannabis for that at least once a month, and for probably more than just once a month, but. When I used it, I found out that I was spiritually enlightened by using it. And also that I enjoyed it. So what am I? Am I a medical user? I think so. You know, my husband always told me I was a medical user, so I wouldn't argue with him. And, but I also consider myself a person who gets a spiritual benefit and a recreational benefit from it. So I don't like to split those hairs. And I don't think that we should all be bothered by that. I think we should use it the way we like. It's a pretty gosh darn good drug, not because it just is so pleasureful and enlightening, but also because of lack of harms. And we all know this. I'm not going to spend any more time with what's okay about marijuana, but everybody in this room knows that it's pretty darn okay to use marijuana. Okay? So we'll just put that whole thing to bed. Now, seeing as it's okay to use marijuana, but the law doesn't see it that way, we all have a challenge, and that's what we've been talking about here today. And we need to change marijuana laws, not only at the federal level, but at the state level. It's important to do this in each step. Actually, I've been involved with an effort to change international marijuana policy, which is a huge chunk to bite off. Another very active member of Virginians Against Drug Violence, Mike Crowlett's out in Ferrum, Virginia, out in the western part of the state, has spearheaded that effort, and actually Virginians have been in the leadership of that effort and taking large teams of people to these international meetings. So you have a lot as Virginians to be proud of. But this state is still pretty much, we're considered a very tough nut to crack, because it is a tough nut to crack. Because we have very conservative, basically, I used to tell people back in the day when we still had Jerry Falwell with us, that we have Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell, both in the same state. And basically that is our opposition, the religious right. They are the people who very wrongly think that marijuana is so horrible and ungodly And I do not understand that. Honestly, I think that these religious leaders are concerned because when you do use marijuana, you understand that you really don't need the preacher that much. So, hey, okay, maybe they have a dog in that race, but we can't accept that. So if there's anything that you go away from this room remembering, or if there's one thing you write down today, as any of us says, this is what it's got to be. It's House Bill 1134 and House Bill 1136. House Bill 1134 is a decriminalization bill that was introduced by Harvey Morgan in the last General Assembly session, which starts in January and goes for about 6 weeks every year. House Bill 1136 was a medical marijuana bill, which was okay, needs some improvement. We liked the decriminalization bill better. But Harvey Morgan is a pharmacist. Who knows more about drugs in the General Assembly than Harvey Morgan? He's even a professor of pharmacology at VCU. And he's a member of the Virginia State House of Delegates, and he's the guy who introduced this bill, and he is a pharmacist. So when you go, and this is what I'm asking you to do, something very specific, I'm asking each and every person in this room to find out, if you don't already know, who your member of the Virginia House of Delegates is. And you can do that by going online, just type in Virginia Legislature or Virginia General Assembly, Google it, whatever you do, and find these people, because it's not all that hard to do online. The Virginia Legislative Information System, if you want to make a note of that, is the entity online where all this information is located. Find out who your representative is. These people don't represent that many people. It's a lot easier to approach this guy than it is to approach your member of Congress who goes to Washington, D.C. This is your member of the Virginia House of Delegates. And I want you to tell your Virginia House of Delegates member that you support this bill and you expect them to, and for all of the reasons you've heard here today, why and why they should, and what it is that they know, if they're opposed to it, that Harvey Morgan doesn't know, the pharmacist. Okay? So we've got a popular issue here. You know, most people, as Eric was saying, really agree with this at this point because they're sick and tired of it. Their kids, at this point, you know, we're all, you know, I have a 30-year-old son and a 40-year-old daughter. And, you know, I don't want them arrested for marijuana, you know, and I don't want anybody arrested for marijuana. And so parents and kids and everybody in between, you know, it seems to be a very popular position now. So we've got the winning issue, we've got the popular support. In fact, Harvey Morgan said, and this is another thing you ought to tell your delegate, that he never had so much popular support on any measures he's ever introduced. So why shouldn't your delegate get a piece of that action? They always want to be popular. That's all they care about. They get votes from this. They don't lose votes. So that's another thing you ought to tell them. And then, also, if you wouldn't mind doing this as well, look up your Virginia State Senator and try to figure out, I'm not talking too loud anyway, okay, because I'm kind of passionate about this, sorry. But anyway, check out your senator too and find out when there's going to be a bill in the Senate and why they aren't introducing it. Because that is something, we only got it in the House of Delegates. If you get it on both introduced, if you get bills introduced in both houses, you have a much better chance of getting something passed. And by the way, with marijuana, the 1136, the medical bill, was flawed, deeply flawed. It wouldn't do anything really to get medical marijuana to patients in the state. So that has to be fixed. And we have issues with the use of the word prescription that probably some of you all are familiar with, and you can talk to me or Roy afterwards. But if you're going to talk to your senator, and we need you to, this would be the issue. The medical bill has to be better. The decrim bill could maybe be tweaked a bit too, but it wasn't in bad shape as written. So we had a lot of fun after the session last year because there was this one guy who really hated our bills. And I know Dee said these bills didn't get very far, and it was this guy who kind of stood up and stopped it. So within, a couple of days of the hearing where the bills were killed, there was a little YouTube video about him. And, he kind of got a little embarrassed. Some reporters asked him, what's this all about? And he said, we have an agenda. Hell yeah, we have an agenda. Come on, But this guy's Robert Bell. If you live in the District 58 of the House of Delegates, you should definitely talk to him. Now, in the past, when people have introduced bad marijuana legislation, quite frequently they've been opposed so vehemently that they never want to touch this subject again. It happened with Robert Marshall, who wanted to repeal our very, very limited and worthless medical marijuana bill, but he wanted to repeal it anyway. And then it happened with most recently with the Richmond guy, this Lupasi guy, and we have him talking to a camera saying, I'll never touch that again. And the reason they'll never touch it again is because we do have some people who are active enough to let them know, hey, I didn't like what you did. But what we need to do now is be more proactive, get to them before the session and let them know what you do want them to do. And this is absolutely critical. House Bill 1134 and House Bill 1136, they will get new numbers in January. But until then, everybody's going to recognize them by those numbers. So make sure you know those numbers and make sure you find your member of the House of Delegates. If you have any problem, you can talk to me later. I'll show you how to do this. Pretty easy. If you get my email address, we'll have conversations about what's going on. Now, we have some really great internet activism right now. And Facebook has become an enormous tool for us. So that when we go online, we have Virginians Against Drug Violence. It has a page on Facebook, but we only have it's less than 200 members. So some of you all, please go on there and join that, because I assume you don't like drug violence. But there's also Virginia Normal. You should go there and join that Facebook page. And we should also all get to be friends with each other so that we can communicate with each other. It's very easy on Facebook. And then there's the biggie, the giant, has turned out for some reason to be a page started. Is Brian here today? A guy down in the SSDP down in Newport News started a page called House Bill 1134. And that has more than 8,000 members. So you should definitely go and join that one. And we using Facebook, we managed to fill the hearing room. And Dee talked about this hearing where this law was shut down. And yes, it was. But when the chairman of the committee asked people to rise who were in that room in support of that bill, I don't think anybody stayed in their seat. The whole room stood up. And I think that that's really strong stuff. I have been going to those meetings for a long time. Boy, you have been too. I don't know if I've ever seen that much support for a piece of legislation. So you're darn tooting these pieces of legislation are coming back, and they're going to win eventually. And just before I finish, I'm going to tell you a story about how I took my son, who is now, I lied, he's 32 years old, going on 33. But I took him in a stroller down to the state capitol, and he was less than 2 years old. And I was lobbying at that time. Of course, I was always involved with marijuana policy, but I'm a political person, so I was lobbying for elected school boards at the time. And I pushed my son into my House of Delegates member's office in his little stroller, and I told my delegate that I wanted an elected school board rather than an appointed school board. I had my reasons. I didn't like the way they were getting, and who was getting appointed. And gosh darn it, you know, when he was 18 years old, we got elected school boards. So don't ever give up. If it takes us 18 years, I don't think it will. That was elected school boards. That was a much more contentious issue, believe it or not. But this thing can pass, I think it can pass in 2 or 3 years. All it needs is your energy and your friends' energy. And when you go and you are enjoying cannabis, make sure that this is a topic of conversation that everybody knows about House Bill 1134 and the Facebook page, and House Bill 1136, the medical bill, and let's get these things passed. Okay, is everybody with me?
Thank you. Excuse me. Next, I would like to introduce Christopher Leibig. He is a criminal defense attorney with Swirling, Leibig, and Mosley, and a Virginia Normal Board member. Please give a warm welcome. And for the Normal Legal Committee.
Thank you very much to Sabrina and Dee and everyone else. It's an honor to be part of this, and I've known Keith for a few years, and I just want to start out saying the work that he and others here have done on medical marijuana is a true miracle, but that's not what I'm going to be talking about. My job is not so much politics, but defending people in court for all kinds of crimes, including drug offenses, including big marijuana cases, dealers, growers, and including possessors. This is my perspective. And just 2 quick points to talking about that is, this debate kind of reminds me of years ago I was at a death penalty seminar where some of the best criminal defense attorneys were, and a very good lawyer was speaking, and he kind of went on a caveat of some political advice during which he said, look, I have you all here, you are all people who go out and talk to others, much like the group right here. The mere fact that you're here shows you care about things. When you're out and about talking about this issue, meaning the death penalty, don't so much talk about the fact that it's wrong. Don't so much talk about the fact that it's immoral. Don't even so much talk about the fact that it's racially biased. And I'll tell you why. Because Americans, it is in our blood, we love the idea of punishment. That's here to stay. Instead, he said, talk about the fact that innocent people are being executed. That is the one that's working. Stand on that one. Because the people that are in the middle will buy that one. That reminds me a bit of this budget issue, because likewise with marijuana, although it's not the death penalty, generally speaking, people on the street that don't pay attention to these issues still like the idea of tough on crime and punishment. It's in our culture, and this is what they like. The argument about the budget, however, is working, and here's one example just to me, but my mother, who I sometimes use as a barometer for this, is an Obama-loving soccer mom, but she's like, with the marijuana, what's the big deal, you know? Can't they just not get caught, or, you know, you never did, or, you know, stuff like that. You know, why have you devoted yourself to this? And I'm like, Mom, I could convince you a lot of ways, but I'll tell you this, it's the reason the potholes outside aren't being fixed. Now, that starts to sound like something she might be interested in. So with that beginning, here are the people that will never listen to the budget argument no matter what. Prosecutors. There's no use in going up to a prosecutor in the hallway, and every client wants to say this and go, look, my client's a really great guy, I'm sorry you got caught. You really going to spend the money to prosecute this guy? They're going to roll their eyes and walk away from you and give you a dirty look every time. But here's where regular people will buy this. And here's a little bit of a boring legal point, but it's critical right now. Here's the way that marijuana cases are prosecuted for the last 4 decades. A cop finds somebody with a joint. He seals it in a little bag. He brings it to a Lockworth Police Department. That month, another cop comes, takes all the little joint bags to a lab. A scientist tests all the little joint bags and says, okay, this is marijuana. They produce a piece of paper. It's called a certificate of analysis, send it to the court, and they can use that to prove that you're guilty. This is, in fact, marijuana. A year and a half ago, the United States Supreme Court handed down a case called Melendez-Diaz and a follow-up Virginia case handled by an Alexandria lawyer, my friend Joe King, called Briscoe, which says that violates the Confrontation Clause under the Sixth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, meaning this scientist needs to be in court to confront the defendant, because that scientist is a witness to their guilt. What that means is, to oversimplify it a bit, is in every single marijuana case in Virginia, they can't just use the sheet of paper anymore if the defendant does what he needs to do to file certain notices and such. The scientist has to drive to court and sit around waiting for the case to be called to prove that person guilty. This is a massive thing because of the cost. Therefore, marijuana defendants have the ability to glut the docket and to really make people notice. So now I can go up to a prosecutor in the hallway and say, you really want to prosecute this guy, he's a great guy, you really want to spend the money on it. They're still going to roll their eyes and walk away because they don't care. Their job is locking people up. But other people hearing about this do care. These scientists could be doing DNA tests on sex offenses, other stuff. Instead, they're on the road driving around Virginia to sit around on a stupid pot case. A couple of things just about rhetorical points that from my experience I see kind of working and or not working. All of the arguments against marijuana legalization are morally bankrupt, except I would submit to you possibly one. We have the standard ones. What about driving? It's dangerous, right? Okay, well look, we've had DUI on the books forever and they had no problem prosecuting people for it with marijuana. It's actually got presumptively low levels. You can be convicted if you're not even high. Okay, children, we have to protect the children. That's fine. We've got that issue with alcohol as well. There is absolutely no evidence that children are going to use marijuana less if it's legalized. It's the gateway drug thing. I won't even go there. That they're helping organized crime. Yeah, well, we're helping organized crime by having it illegal much more than users are. It's addictive. Yeah, that's a throwaway. But here's an interesting point that I think if we recognize, we can see has some weight to it, and it should be talked about directly. I live next door to a DC cop. I sit on my porch, drinking beer, and he has to see him talk about legal stuff. And so I asked him, what do all the guys think about medical marijuana in DC? And he's like, we hate it. It's a joke. It's horrible. And I'm like, really? Seriously, why? He's like, because we don't know anymore if we can search somebody if we smell marijuana. And I'm like, that is actually very interesting. It's probably the true point, the true thought you encounter in law enforcement and in prosecutors and probably even delegates to the General Assembly who know about criminal justice. They know. Police being able to search people, search cars and such because of marijuana is the real use to law enforcement of having it illegal. I would submit that when you go up to someone who's pushing back hard on, well, what's wrong with marijuana, it's harmless, if you see them in a position where they'll never agree, they're just never going to go there. I submit to you often, this is what's in their head if they know about law enforcement. They know that this is how cars get searched. This is how guns are found. This is how many, it's a tool that is routinely used. I mean, nobody likes it if a police officer says he smelled marijuana when he did not, which happens. Most of them are honest. Let's face it, they smell it quite often. What that means is they get to search the car, search the person, and this is how they come up with other crimes. And so the fact that this has some weight to it, I would submit, because in fact there are actual criminals out there, could be addressed so that then at least people know that you know one of the things lying behind this whole thing. I think that even though I'm in favor of legalization of marijuana immediately, in a baby step sense of it, if you had possession of marijuana being merely a civil ticket for which you could not be arrested, it was a mail-in fine with none of the silly license suspension, none of the forced drug classes, none of this, that wouldn't remove the right of a police officer to search a person if they smell marijuana. And that wouldn't be my ideal choice, but I do also think that by acknowledging this, it is possibly a step that more people would be willing to accept. One brief thing about, I think if you're debating somebody, and I'm thinking of prosecutors, we had when I was a public defender 7 or 8 years ago, we had a lifelong prosecutor come to apply for a job in our office. And we're immediately skeptical. We're like, why does this guy want to work with a bunch of 30-year-olds defending people when he's had a whole career as a prosecutor or whatever, so we interview him, decent guy. So we started pushing him on marijuana. You know, what do you think? Should it be legal? Should it be illegal? Whatever. And he's kind of like trying to gloss it over. We're like, look, here's the thing. You've been prosecuting people for this for more than 20 years. What gives him that? You know, this isn't the way we feel about it. And so what he came to is what I submit everybody comes to that gets pushed on this point. He said, come on, nobody really goes to jail for it anyway. And disagree, first of all, but I'm like, are you serious? That's the argument? It should be a jailable offense because nobody goes to jail for it anyway? And I think that is, you can push anybody to that place. If you go straight at them with the fact, oh, come on, you really want to put these people behind bars, there's all these sex offenders out there, they will go there. Oh yeah, but they don't really go to jail anyway. Then what's the use of it? It's ridiculous. These are just some of the things I noticed. One last thing I wanted to mention, I heard there's been some talk about how to influence the General Assembly, and I'm just tossing this idea out there. General Assembly elections in Virginia, especially primary elections, which are usually held in June, very rarely have any turnout at all. It's not really all that hard to get enough votes to win a primary election in certain places, and people like you should consider doing it yourself. Even if you went to this school, you can consider doing it. I would just share this idea I've had, which I refer to as the rope-a-dope strategy, which is that, you don't start running for the office saying the reason you're doing it is marijuana, because, I mean, that's not it. You can have a lot of other ideas, too. You just go straight. 100%, your opponent's going to find out you're in this group or whatever, and they're going to attack you for it. And then you just respond by saying, of course I'm in this group, everyone should be, and I guess my opponent loves the war on drugs and thinks it's going really well. The point being, if you can get that person to run against you, they might beat you, but they cannot run against marijuana if they take on that burden, because there's just too many people that care about it, like it's been pointed out. You get 1,000 people to turn up for it, you win that. And it's just a thought. That's really all I had. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, we have our last but not least speaker, Robert Sharpe. He is the leading author for Media Awareness Project with over 2,300 published articles and letters to the editor. Please give a warm welcome to Robert Sharpe.
It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm not going to talk about grassroots media activism that can't get the reception, and I'll tell you anything you need to know if that's your interest. I started out with Students for Sensible Drug Policy in 1999, and now I volunteer. When I'm an activist, I volunteer for Commonwealth for Drug Policy. My day job is with local government. I want to go back to the history of marijuana laws briefly, just to help put things in context. America's first marijuana law was actually in 1619, passed in Jamestown Colony here in Virginia, and the law required all farmers to grow Indian hemp. So we've come a long way since then, obviously, and we're talking industrial hemp to make rope and sails and clothes and so forth. During the early 1900s, the primary marijuana users were Mexican migrants. The Mexican Revolution was spilling over our borders. There were also a lot of black jazz musicians in New Orleans in particular and the East Coast. And so white people, by and large, had never even heard of it. Even if they were growing industrial hemp in their backyard, they didn't know what marijuana was. So again, mostly Mexicans and blacks. It's identified with race. The first laws were passed in the Southwest. The first federal law, Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, was really made possible by one person, a very ambitious bureaucrat by the name of Harry Anslinger, who wanted to grow an empire, and he couldn't do it based on just the outlawing of cocaine and heroin. And I'm going to read you an offensive quote, so bear with me. There are 1,000 total marijuana smokers in the U.S., and most are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. The satanic music, jazz, and swing result from marijuana use. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and any others. So the point I want to make is
That's true.
racial profiling is not an accident. it's deliberate intent. The first marijuana laws were passed, they were intended to demarginalize an already marginalized population. Now, over time, the cultural aspects have shifted. Now we have another subculture. We have the hippies from the 60s, and they're wrapped up in this too. The point I want to make is that marijuana laws are not based on science. They're not based on health costs. They're based on xenophobia and racism and bureaucratic power grabs. So let's take Harry Anslinger's 100,000 marijuana smokers at face value. Where are we today? 15.2 million users, according to the latest government survey. That's a 15,000% increase. How successful is this program? We have higher rates of marijuana use than Spain, Portugal, or the Netherlands. In fact, we have higher rates of marijuana use in this country than any country in Western Europe, with the possible exception of the Czech Republic. The Netherlands, you can buy marijuana in a coffee shop over the counter. They have roughly half the rates of use that we do. So anyone who tells you that if marijuana is decriminalized, that use is going to go through the roof, they're lying to you. And I've always thought that this is an intergenerational culture war and that victory is inevitable. We're going to win one way or another because time is on our side. The older generation who confuse marijuana with heroin and cocaine, they don't know the difference. They're a dying breed. But what makes this a particularly unique time is just the economy. And also, as Lenice mentioned, Harry Morgan, we've got a great advocate here in Virginia, a Republican pharmacist. But my agency is about to go into its third or fourth year of successive budget cuts. We've lost police, firefighters, teachers, nurses. I mean, this is happening throughout the state. And I come from Northern Virginia, where it's very affluent. But we're still strung so thin that, we're very close to being on the cover of the Washington Post because of some horror story because the government, couldn't respond to a Child Protective Services case or something along those lines. The state is really hurt. And think about, if you take 2-3 marijuana offenders, put them in jail for a year, that's equivalent to one police officer, one firefighter, a teacher salary. We cannot afford to subsidize the prejudice of culture warriors. And at this very moment, HB 1134 did not pass, but at the same time, they set something into the budget where they want to look at misdemeanor offenses and what they can characterize as non-jailable to save money on criminal defense. So we may get decrimmed in a back door, although it will still be a penalty on paper. Another thing that really helps us right now is that Governor McDonald is really counting on the deregulating alcohol sales, the ABC stores. I don't know if you've been following that debate at all, but now they're state-run, that's a holdover from prohibition. He wants to turn it over to the private sector. His tax plan really hinges upon increasing the sale of hard liquor. Otherwise, the numbers do not add up. So they're going to be very hard-pressed, if marijuana reform is a big issue this year. A lot of, what about, we can't send the wrong message, what about the children, this, that. They're trying to increase the sale of hard liquor in Virginia. And that's straight from the top. We've also got Proposition 19, California, which was mentioned, that's going to be a tipping point. We've got violence in New Mexico. Ciudad Juarez is a mess. That's out of control. They may legalize it whether we like it or not, just because things are just so crazy there right now. What can you do to make a difference? Lenice mentioned just to write your elected official. I fully agree. And it doesn't even have to be specific. You can just write them and say, I'm for marijuana decrim. Tell them, I don't want to see you lay off any more teachers. I don't want to see you lay off any more police officers or firefighters. 6% of all arrests in the state of Virginia are for marijuana offenses. I'm sure they're wrapped up in other things, but 6% of a shrinking police force is dedicated to marijuana offenses. So again, write your elected official, contact them. I would encourage you to get involved. If you want to hear more about grassroots media activism, talk to me afterwards. As Keith said, or other people have said, come out of the closet. Obviously there's limits. You get pulled over by a police officer, you don't want to tell them you're a cannabis consumer. Probably not a good idea. I work in local government. I'm not going to confirm or deny anything. I will talk about past use. I smoke more pot than Bob Marley and Widows combined. But it's particularly important, among your family and friends, so that they know. And I would also urge you to defy the stereotypes. Get good grades, stay in school, and all that other stuff. I know that when I was smoking in undergrad, the best grades I got were when I was smoking heaviest. I'm not saying it makes you smart. I'm saying I overcompensated. And I surprised myself. So I would encourage you to do that as well. I'm not sure what I'm trying to go quickly. I talk fast. I haven't done any public speaking since I think the normal conference in 2003. So thank you for having me, and I'll end with just a Margaret Mead quote: "Never underestimate the power of a small group of people to change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." So please go out there and change the world.
Thank you. Let's get a round of applause for all of our panelists. I would like to thank everybody for coming, and if anyone has any questions, this is a good time for question and answer. We'll be doing it for 15 to 20 minutes if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, we will be having a reception at the Cary Street Cafe immediately following this event, where we will be pulling our raffle ticket winners. So if you want to find out if you won, I looked over them. It looked like everyone put their contact information in case you don't make it. But that's where we will be drawing the winners. And we will be selling other stuff there as well. So we hope to see you all there. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, the raffle tickets